Hello friends and welcome back to another new releases reading vlog. Today I'm going to introduce you to some of the proofs that I already have for this month. I'm sure, I don't know, I might be able to pick up one or two more, but these are the books that I'm going to be trying to get through in the month of July. These are all due to be released this month. So in case you missed it, I am a children's bookseller, which means that I get access to plenty of proofs. Usually before a book is released, sometimes they come in a little bit late. And these are the books that we have proofs for that I am interested in, that I am excited to read. I did do this video for June's releases last month, so if you missed that video, I'll leave a link in the cards and in the description box below for you. And as with that video, I may not get to everything that I want to get to in this video, but let's have a chat about the proofs that I already have for July. The first is actually the only YA of the four that I have, at least for now. This is The Snow Laundry by Met Jacobson. And you may have noticed this already, but I do tend to be someone who prefers middle fiction over YA, but the very first thing that the blurb says sold me on this. With the intensity of The Handmaid's Tale, the drama of Divergent, and the political intrigue of the Darkest Mind series, this is a captivating, fast-paced thriller set in a dystopian world not so different from our own. Now, I haven't actually read Divergent and I don't know what the Darkest Mind series is, but The Handmaid's Tale is one of my favorite books of all time. It's the book that made me start to like reading. So, I mean, it was a winner for me. Then we have a new middle fiction from Pip Harry. This is August and Jones. This one follows two 11-year-olds. Jones is a young kid who's just moved from country New South Wales to Sydney, which is a capital city, and really struggling with that transition. And also they had cancer as a toddler and now they're having symptoms that they're concerned might be a new tumour returning. They become friends with a kid named August who has a bit of a troubled home life, and together they decide to cheer themselves up by making a bucket list. After all, with your best friend beside you, anything is possible. I think this is going to be like an emotional but affirming kind of read, and I'm looking forward to it. This is Nura and the Immortal Palace by M.T. Khan, and I think this is a debut. It's a middle fiction and it's the start of a new series. Welcome to a world of magic, splendor, and trickery. Welcome to the world of the Jinn. Nura has worked all her life in the mica mines, hoping to someday find the demon's tongue, a legendary treasure buried deep underground. But when a terrible accident traps her best friend, she determines to save him and crosses over into the enchanting and treacherous realm of the Jinn. And this is a magical middle grade adventure rooted in Muslim tradition. And apparently it's going to have a really, really pretty die-cut cover. So I'm looking forward to seeing that and also to reading this book. And then this is probably the one that I'm most looking forward to. This is All Four Quarters of the Moon by Shirley Marr. I haven't read anything by Shirley Marr, but there is a book on my shelf that I've been meaning to get to by Shirley Marr that I've heard really good things about. But this is her new release. And I don't think this is what the cover is going to look like when it's printed, but it's really pretty. I kind of want it to be the cover. It's gorgeous. So this is what the cover's going to look like. I think I prefer this one, although that one does look quite sweet too. So these are the 4 proofs that I'm going to get started on right away. Who knows, over the course of the month I may pick up 1 or 2 more from the store, because as I said, sometimes proofs come in late, sometimes even well after the book's already been released. But all of these sound quite good, and I think especially the middle fiction all sound right up my alley. The YA is a little bit different from what I normally read, but I am intrigued. But I have plenty to get stuck into, so let's get to reading. Hello friends, I've just had a shower, which explains the hair, and I'm here just to get ready. I'm going to work this afternoon, but while I'm here I thought I could talk to you a little bit about All Four Corners of the Moon, which I finished yesterday. This was just a really, really sweet story about sisterhood. Paging is the oldest character and it's told in third person, but like she is our main character. And then her little sister Bijou is about 5. And they live in Singapore with their mum, their dad, and their grandmother. But right at the beginning of the story, we learn that the family is moving to Australia for their father's work. And so we follow this family as they make that really, really big move between countries, between cultures, and between languages. Paging is very much like the very responsible, conscientious older sister, and she really does take a lot of responsibility for Bijou. She cares a lot about doing the right thing, being a good girl, and making sure that her actions are honourable. And we really get to see how all of the members of this family really respond very differently to this huge move. Paging in particular just really struggles not only with fitting in at school and making friends, and also just sort of, you know, even though she is really smart and clever, and she does speak English and she does read English, she's just not up to speed with the other kids just yet. But on top of that, for Paging, she's just sort of like feeling really burdened, because not only is she herself just trying to do her best to fit in, she's also got a lot of expectations, being the oldest, taking care of Bijou. She just feels really weighed down by a lot of other baggage around her, and she's really struggling with all those things. She does, however, make a really beautiful friend in a girl named Joanna in her class. Joanna is someone who clearly doesn't have a very happy home life, but she and Pei-Jing really kick it off. It's really sweet watching their friendship develop. Also throughout the story, we see hints that the girl's grandmother maybe isn't super well, and she seems to be showing signs of aging and maybe dementia. So this book, I think, offers some quite important and beautiful too, I think, commentary around things like immigrants in Australia and their lived experience and how it's challenging fitting into a new place. But also some sort of quite subtle and gentle commentary around things like poverty and domestic violence, and also aging, and I suppose familial obligation and honour when it comes to our elders. And of course also the challenges of being sort of between two cultures, of at once wanting to honour their Singaporean and Chinese culture, but also wanting to find a way to fit in and connect with other kids. And the tensions between those things, between home and their parents, but then also their school. But overall, this is a pretty small kind of story. It's very character focused, and I think some people would describe this as slow. For me, it all just felt quite gentle. I think gentle is the best way I would describe this. Although it dealt with some bigger topics and some bigger feelings, it was all done in a very just gentle and almost cozy kind of way. I think what aided the cozy feeling in particular was that at the beginning of each chapter, we get sort of a part of a story that Bijou is telling Pei-Jing. So at the beginning of each chapter, there's like a page or so of this story that covers the whole breadth of the book. And it seems to be like an amalgamation and Bijou's own imagination of different Chinese folktales and mythology. For example, there was like elements of like the moon goddess and the archer in there, but then it also spoke about other things. And throughout, we just get to explore some really beautiful themes of family, of sisterhood, of friendship, and of staying true to yourself, and how that can kind of be a tricky line to walk sometimes, especially when you're someone who has existed in different cultures and different settings. So it wasn't quite as like emotionally impactful and hard-hitting as I initially thought it was going to be, just from what I know of this author and the blurb and just the vibes that I got. I thought it was going to be a little bit more, hard-hitting, a cry kind of book. I didn't cry. I did still find there was some really beautifully emotionally resonant moments. But yeah, it was just much more of a gentler experience. And overall, I really liked it. I found it interesting in that this book kind of reminded me, not exactly, but just sort of vibes of if you crossed When You Trap a Tiger by Tay Keller with some of the lived experience discussion we got in Alice Pung's memoir, An Unpolished Gem. I don't want to oversimplify any comparisons there, but I just think in terms of how When You Trap a Tiger brought in Korean mythology and folk tales into the story, and it was this beautiful relationship between two sisters. In this book, the folk tales and mythology are less a part of the book, like it's not magical realism or fantasy or anything like that, but it's still there as a sign of how important their culture and their upbringing and their heritage is to these girls. And then of course the sisterly connection. And then the book that I read just before this one was An Unpolished Gem, so maybe it's also just because that one's so fresh in my mind, but in that one we get to sort of hear Alice's experience and her family's experience of migrating to Australia. And I think in particular what reminded me of that book when I was reading this was the mother's experience, and how back home she was a really like outgoing, social, successful woman, but in Australia she sort of ends up isolating herself or becoming isolated primarily because she doesn't speak the language very well. And just how much of a barrier that is to her, and then how much that in turn then sort of degrades and eats away at her own identity. So yeah, although it was a very gentle, small kind of story, I think it was quite impactful and quite well done. And ultimately, I just loved the two sisters and their relationship and some of the other friendships that develop as well. But the sisters and that sisterly bond was just beautiful to read about. So that's it for all 4 quarters of the moon. It was lovely. I'm now going to get stuck into Nura and the Immortal Palace. So I will talk to you soon. Hello again, friends. I've just finished Nura and the Immortal Palace by M.T. Khan. This was such a wonderful, magical middle grade. I loved it. So apparently, according to the information on the back of my proof, this is the first in a series by a new talent. But this very much reads like it could happily be a standalone, and I quite enjoyed it for that fact. One of the other things that I really liked about this is the fact that it is a magical fantasy middle grade featuring a wonderful female protagonist, But she is not a magical child. And I just haven't read something where a regular kid sort of falls into a magical world in quite a while. I can't remember the last time I did. Basically, we meet Nura, who is a young girl who is the oldest of 3 siblings who live with her mum. Her father has passed away several years before, and they're struggling financially. And so Nura doesn't go to school anymore. Instead, she works in the mica mines. She literally every day goes and digs with her bare hands and tries to find mica, enough to make some money to feed her family. It's dangerous work, but she's good at it. And she sort of has given up on the idea of having an education or furthering herself, because she figures if she can sacrifice and just sort of make enough money, her younger siblings will have opportunities that she's never had before. After a while though, her mother, who is also sort of working multiple jobs and trying to get by, tells her that she needs to stop working in the mines. It's too dangerous and she's too worried that she will pass away or something will happen to her just like their father. So Nura goes to work on what is going to be her last day in the mines, and she decides that she's going to strike it big. She's going to find a legendary treasure buried deep in the underground, which is known as the Demon's Tongue. So she digs faster and harder and deeper than she ever has before, but then the worst happens and the mine collapses. She manages to escape, but 5 children, including her best friend Faisal, is trapped and they don't know where they are. So she comes back that night to try and find and rescue them. And in so doing, she's digging deep and deep and deep again like she was before. But this time she sort of goes through some portal and ends up in this ocean, this pink or purple ocean. And there's a bunch of jinn in this world. The first jinn she meets sort of take her out of the ocean and put her in her boat and take her to this magical palace where all of these jinn come and stay. It's basically a magical, massive hotel for jinn. Obviously, Nura has been taught her whole life that jinn are tricksters and that they cannot be trusted. And yet this palace is full of gold and jewels and this big celebration full of food. Like, Nura decides that she is going to get in on the action and try and basically get enough wealth to take back to her family so that they will never go hungry again. There's a whole lot more going on. I just don't want to spoil too much for you, but this was just really fun and really quite refreshing. I love the fact that we didn't find out that Nura was actually some like chosen one special magical kid. Instead, she was just a regular kid who'd had a really hard life, who was put in a really strange magical situation and had to figure her way out. And what really made this book special, I think, is some of the discussion that was had in this book and the themes that were explored. Obviously, with Nura being like a child laborer who's working in mines that are unsafe so that she can find mica, which is then used in like just people's makeup and in paint. Definitely some strong commentary there. And then as the kids end up in this palace, there's some massive exploration around greed and also, honestly, some class consciousness discussion as well about oppression and how oppressors very often and cleverly get the oppressed classes to fight amongst themselves so that they're not, you know, looking at their real oppressors and rising up together in collective solidarity. I love Nura. I love her friends. I love the message of this story. So many of the characters that we get to meet, they're all like just very, very different characters with very strong personalities and different experiences. We see some great friendships as well as like teamwork and solidarity. All the while we're in the midst of this like magical, massive, wealthy palace surrounded by a pink sea and purple sky. Like, it's really evocative too. And we see very clearly that not everything is as it seems and that you can't judge a book by its cover. Although maybe you can judge this one because this is very pretty and like the actual cover that it's got, we've already got it in the shop, is even prettier. So a really solid middle fiction, a really solid debut, and like I said, it wraps up really well as a standalone, so you can read and enjoy this 250-page book in an afternoon like I did. But I am really looking forward to the sequel and seeing where the author takes it next. And I haven't even mentioned yet that Nura is Muslim. Her family is Muslim. They celebrate Eid. And we see quite a lot of her religious experience and her culture coming through in the character and the story as well. So it's just awesome. I can't wait to recommend this at work and to get it in the hands of some kids who I know are going to love it. I'm honestly not sure what I'm going to read next, but I will talk to you soon. So the setting looks different, and that is because I'm in Bateman's Bay at my grandparents' house. We were only supposed to be here for 4 days. It looks like it's going to be quite a bit longer than that. So I didn't bring any of the other proofs that I was planning on reading for this video. But before I left Melbourne, the last thing that I did was buy a new book. This is The Valley and the Flood by Rebecca Mahoney. and this is a new release YA title. So although it's not a proof, it is a new release, and I really liked this, so I wanted to talk about it with you in this video. This is quite a strange magical realism kind of title. It's one of the most unique YA titles I've ever personally read, and primarily it is a story exploring the complexities and the intricacies of grief, and in particular PTSD, and it does it through this magical realism lens. So I went into this knowing that I was either going to love it or hate it. As a mental health advocate, as someone with a lived experience of mental illness, I often have very strong feelings about books that try to tackle those really important but complex topics. And like I said, this is kind of weird, so it's a little hard to talk about, but let me try and lay the land for you a little bit. In this, we follow our main character, Rose, whose best friend Gabby died about a year ago. And Rose has been seeing a therapist, and she's been told that she has PTSD from the event around Gabby's death and some other stuff that's happened in Rose's life. We meet her when she's essentially run away from home. She's told her parents she's one place, and the people that she's supposed to be at, she's told them that she's somewhere else. And she's driving through the Nevada desert by herself late at night. And there's not supposed to be any radio around, but then she starts to hear something come through the radio. And it's something that should not be on the radio. It's something only she should have access to. And it is the last message that her friend Gabby left her before she died. Around the same time, her car breaks down. In the middle of the desert, she's by herself. But she does see a radio tower, like signal tower, off in the distance. And she figures that that is where this message has come from. So she goes in that direction to, one, find out if she can get her car towed and fixed, but also to see what the hell is going on with this message. From there, she kind of finds herself in this weird town where there are people who can see the future. She meets one girl who is the third best prophet in the area, so obviously there's more than one person who can tell the future. And we also find out that there are some weird entities that live in this town and that are often drawn to this town. And Rose's arrival has been foretold. She's expected. And connected with Rose's arrival is the prophecy of the end of the town. Basically, it's believed that Rose has brought with her something that the people have called the flood. They said that that's the best approximation they have in language, in English, for what is following Rose to this town. So I won't talk too much more about the plot specifically, but essentially this flood, the flood that is following Rose, is very clearly like a magical realism metaphor element for her PTSD. And because this is a story about PTSD, we get things like flashbacks, which sometimes are very clearly flashbacks to certain situations. Other times they're more like a blurry line between reality and a flashback. And I have read some reviewers talk about the fact that this isn't always the easiest book to follow, that it doesn't really always make sense. And although I found the core parts that I needed to follow more than easy to do so, I do think that that sort of unusual, complicated, strange element and sort of non-linear storytelling really reflects the challenges and the complexities of PTSD itself. So I think it worked. I think it worked really well. And then there was a lot of exploration of things like stigma, both external and also internalized. So I personally found this an incredibly moving and atmospheric story, and I think it tackled the topic of mental illness and PTSD and grief and stigma and all of those messy, complicated things really, really well. It felt quite gentle in a lot of ways, despite the fact that we were dealing with some very heavy topics. And although we do get some flashbacks, sometimes several times to the same situation, to traumatic memories that Rose has, it never felt gratuitous to me, and it always felt, I guess it just felt really honest and human. And of course, this cover, I know it's sort of a bit glary in here, but this cover is just incredible. And I think it really captures, I don't know, the feeling of this book very well. Because although it's hard-hitting, it's emotional, it's heavy in some ways, ultimately it's a really atmospheric and beautiful story. I don't think that this is a book that will work for everybody, but for me it really worked and I loved it. Highly recommend. So although I don't have the other two books that we read in this vlog here to sort of pop up and show you, I have to say this is another really solid experience. I'm reading some really, really good new release stuff at the moment. I feel like the last video that we did of this, I enjoyed all 5. Obviously I had a strong favorite, whereas here, I don't know that I do have a strong favorite. I loved all 3 books, and all 3 were so different. The Valley and the Flood, obviously being the only YA, definitely does stand in its own realm, but I loved this, and as someone who doesn't tend to fall in love with YA very easily, I think this is something quite special. All Four Quarters of the Moon was a really gentle, sweet story about sisterhood that did also manage to tackle some important subjects as well. And then of course Nura and the Immortal Palace. I loved this one, and I think out of all of the three, this is probably the one with the most mass appeal, to be perfectly honest. It's got such a fun middle fiction fantasy kind of vibe, but then it also has such good theming and content explored as well. Like I mentioned, things about child labor, greed and oppression, and all of it was done really well. It was very clear in its message, but the story and the characters really stood on their own and made it a really enjoyable read as well. So I loved and would totally recommend all three of these books. Let me know if you have, or if you plan on reading any of these books. I would love to hear in the comments below. And of course, a big thank you if you've made it to the end of this video, and to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon. And an especially big thank you goes to Livia, Lynette Brown and Marie. So that's all from me for this July new releases / proofs vlog. I hope you enjoyed watching. I will talk to you in the comments below and in the next video. And until then, happy reading. Bye.